Welcome to Module 2, Nature and Components of Learning Targets. This is our first theme video. I'm going to break them into two. This first one is going to look specifically at learning targets, and the second one at assessments. And as we go through the videos, you'll see why I do that. This video and the next one are important in two ways. We'll cover a lot of information on the final project, and we will also be looking at this week's assignment and key components of it. So with that said, let's get right to it. As you know, my desire to keep these short and informative. Clear learning targets. Okay, let's make it clear. Of course, we know that learning targets are statements of intended learning, but we have to be careful there. A lot of times we just think about it in terms of learning, and really only in terms of learning. But there are three aspects of clear learning targets. Now, if it's in red, that's a hint that you're looking at something that probably you'll need to know for the final exam. Okay, one, they're clear to the teacher. I have seen in cases where teachers put the learning targets because they follow the curriculum guide and don't know really what they're supposed to do with those. That's minor cases, but it does happen. They have to be clear to the teacher. There's a connection between the targets and the assessment quality. That's really the focus of this week's assignment, is how well we match not targets to instruction, but to targets to assessments. And I'll give examples of that in a short bit. And they're the focus of instruction. It doesn't make sense for me to talk about something over here if the target's about a skill, and yet I want to talk about facts. Okay, so keep that in mind. Those are three key components. Now, you'll see in this week's assignment that I'm looking for two types of learning targets. The formal, that's one that's usually either in the core, Common Core. You see that all the time, the Louisiana standards. But they're the ones that are in the curriculum guide. This one's pretty straightforward, solve addition and subtraction word problems. Most students will understand that. But I also ask you to write things in a student-friendly version. What does that actually mean for me? Solve addition and subtraction word problems. Mine is, hey, given a real-world addition or subtraction problem, or a real-world problem, I can solve the problem using addition and subtraction using objects or drawings to do so. Write it so it's written from the student's perspective, how they can understand it. So always think of learning targets that you may think obvious. This is particularly with younger grades where sometimes they're written really complex and the student may not know what that means. Make them student-friendly. There are two types of learning targets, okay? There's academic and disposition. Academics are generally those that are always included in your curriculum guide. Disposition targets generally tend to be the ones that teachers set for their students. The key here is that when we look at academic targets, they break into four categories: knowledge, reasoning, skill, and product. This PowerPoint is up in Moodle for you to use at your convenience. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on this. By the way, I probably should have put the academic targets in red because that is a question on the final exam. Let's talk about the knowledge targets. They fall into three types. There's factual, which you mostly see all the time. What year did this happen? No, they're just one-word answers. Generally, they can be true, false, fill in the blank, those types of things. Procedural, knowing how to do something. Okay, so if I look at how to solve a two-step binomial equation, okay, then that usually is a process that I have them memorize. Step one, do this. Step two, do that. That's knowledge, not necessarily a reasoning. And then conceptual knowledge, understands. Now, I encourage you to look up. I have in Moodle a target thing that I'll refer to later that breaks down Bloom's taxonomy by words and verbs. And understands is one of the categories, and it shows you the verbs that go with understands. Types of reasoning. This is more complex because now we're not just stating facts. And notice, by the way, lists are on knowledge facts. If I'm able to reproduce a list the 50 states, that's knowledge. Now, if I have to classify the states by region, Well, that requires some inference. I have to know the regions, south, north, east, west, whatever regions you establish that they should know, southeast, northeast. And therefore, that requires a little bit more reasoning on their behalf. Well, this state falls here, so therefore it's got to be, okay? Comparison, you see this all the time, compare and contrast, do an analysis of something. Why is something good or something bad? So reasoning is a little bit more than just stating facts. Now, this is important because if you have a reasoning target where they have to compare something or classify something, you should not be using true false tests. You should not be using multiple choice tests. And that's one flaw. We're going to talk about look at tests in sound design when we get to that. Skills, really, this is the oldest form of test of target there is. The old apprenticeship where someone had to learn to build a clay vessel or build a wooden table or, put concrete together, things, that required training for skills. Nowadays, we can take that further. You have, we look at the physical activities. I have an example of basketball here, throwing football, sports, fine arts. We see it all the time, being able to paint, the various I may discussed, performing arts, whether it be band, choir, or performance, even languages. Translating is a skill, okay? It's not a performance, although I think it comes up later in one of the assessments as a performance assessment. And we're going to talk about the different type of assessments, how they align to the different targets. Now, there are some unique difficulties because of the word skills, because now in education, you see things like comprehension skills, research skills, reading skills, math skills. That throws a little bit of complexity into the skill learning targets. But when I refer to it here, I'm referring to those things that are mentioned above: fine arts, physical education, things that require people to do something. And then product, okay? Now, this is interesting because you say, well, wait a minute, Dr. Hyland, building a vase, creating a vase, that's a product. Yeah, the product is the learning target. That's, did you do the vase? Did you get the vase? The skill is how to do it. And that's one thing we have to learn. They build upon each other. Remember, I have to have knowledge of something before I can reason about it. And I have to have reason about it in order to use a skill, in order to use that skill. And then that skill helps me develop a product. So it is a scaffolded system. And understand that about targets. Generally, early in the year, you have a lot of knowledge targets. And towards the second semester, second half of the year, you're really getting into some of these product learning targets. Now, that's the academic targets. Let's talk about the dispositional learning targets. These are the ones you tend to set. So you may see this in language arts. You want students to want to read more. In math, I used to struggle with this. I was a math teacher. I had students who didn't believe they were capable of doing math. I wanted them to believe they could. And so you see these examples. These are ones that I remember. You may want to, you may have others. And so when we get to that, you can use those. That particularly, I'm thinking about the final exam. So learning targets. This was just a brief overview of things you need to think about with learning targets, because often we don't think about really what they are. And hopefully it gave you some thoughts. Do I really think about what a target is and how I match that? The next video, the second theme video on sound design, is about assessments and really how do I think in terms of assessments, in terms of targets. I hope this prompted something in your mind to think of something that you may want to